All right, well, let's jump in here. We've got our study guide questions for today. What are negative feedback loops? What are positive feedback loops? What does positive feedback loops teach us about collective learning? How did technology begin to increase connectivity and collective learning during the medieval and early modern ages? And what are the effects of the Columbian Exchange in the Americas? All right, our first question is, what are negative feedback loops and what are positives? Who can tell me, first of all, what is a negative feedback loop? Just what is that? Not positive, just a negative feedback loop. Tanner, go ahead.
Negative feedback loop, basically everything just, it's a continuous loop in which everything repeats, and as one thing increases too much, it's like predators and prey, right? As the prey population increases, there is more predators can hunt more, and so they can reproduce more. Then the prey population goes down, so then the predator population goes down, and the prey population goes back up, and it keeps going like this, basically. So yeah, in that very eloquent terms, that's a negative feedback loop.
Fantastic. Fantastic example. Good. What is a positive feedback loop? Who can tell me? Taylor.
So positive feedback loop is just, and so instead of one of the components of the cycle counteracting the effects of the other, they all just build on each other continuously, unless you stop it yourself, of course. And so basically just keeps going, like with the example in the reading was with the mic amplifier. So you speak into the mic and it amplifies the sound into a sound system, and it projects it, and sometimes that feedback can get caught in the mic. And so they'll make it even louder and louder and louder until it's like super annoying.
Until it's just ringing in everyone's ears. Exactly. Fantastic examples, guys. So one feedback loop that we would think would be a positive feedback loop that actually wasn't throughout the agricultural age was the population. You would think was population. You would think population leads to more population, and it's always growing and always growing and always growing. What is the Malthusian cycle? Do you guys remember that? What is this basic idea of the Malthusian cycle? And how is it a negative feedback loop? Can anyone tell me? Aaron, go ahead.
Well, basically, when you've got population growth, eventually the population growth outstrips the amount of innovation that you need to create enough food to provide that group of people. So you've got population growth faster than you can have food for them, which means that it shuts down. You have a jump down in population size as people die off due to a variety of different reasons. And so you kind of go up and down in population. It increases fast and then it goes down fast. And whoever said it's like recessions in the chat box is completely right, I think. It functions a very similar way.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, exactly. So the food supply counteracts and causes famines, right? Counteracts the population growth. And population growth throughout the agricultural age, while it did grow over a long, long period of time, in many areas, it was, not in many areas, really in all areas, it's kind of up and down. Sort of on an overall upward trajectory, fairly slowly, but definitely up and down and so forth, and much more like a negative feedback loop. So you see that here. We would normally think of population as just, birth equals more population equals more births, and it just goes around and around and around and around, right? But food supply is that part of it creates the negative feedback loop, and actually, creates death and famine and so forth, and decreases population. So it creates a negative feedback loop, and within that is a positive feedback loop if you can keep the food supply ahead of the game. So what we've seen is throughout most of the agricultural age, well, really throughout all of human history, right, somewhat steady population growth, but we see a dip with the Black Plague, right? Major dip with the Black Plague. And then you get to about here, and you've got the Industrial Revolution and a massive boom. Why? Why was there this massive boom in population? In 1800, there's roughly 800 million people on the planet. In today, there's 7 billion plus. Why? What changes? Come on, you guys know this. What changes? See a lot of you right. The worlds don't connect. That's a big part of it. We broke the cycle. How did we break the cycle, though? Because we have food, right? How did we get all that food? Aaron, go ahead.
Well, basically, a bunch of factors just started connecting. When we had people connecting the world zones, you suddenly had all these different people and these diverse different ideas from different areas connecting. You have new crops and new ideas coming together to allow for more population growth and more people thinking, and suddenly the pace of learning outstripped the population growth, which means we were allowed to provide for the needs of more and more people into the future rather than running up against a limit and causing the populations to drop. And that's continued because as we get more people, technology just keeps increasing faster than the people that we have to support. So that's why we see such an
Yeah, fantastic example. Good. Essentially, the simple answer is we hit the Industrial Revolution, right? Which is because of the collective learning that had gone on before and led to it, right? But that Industrial Revolution massively increased our ability to utilize power, and one of the things we used that power for was to create more and more and better crops, right? Crops that don't fail as easily, stronger crops. We're able to plow areas that weren't able to be plowed before. We're able to, because of fertilizers and because of industrial systems to get those fertilizers like potash and so forth, we're able to grow significantly more per square acre, and food supply goes through the roof. Tanner, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned how we started breeding and planting crops that were more resistant to particular diseases and all, and I was just going to mention how these days that's almost going to wind up biting us in the butt, I suppose, because we're only planting those particular types of species of bananas and whatnot, and now there's not a lot of genetic diversity, and therefore all those plants are more vulnerable. So yeah, I don't know, it's just an interesting little
and we're going to get into that here in a little bit, Tanner, when we talk about the effects of the Columbian Exchange, but you're exactly right. Yeah, definitely exactly right. Okay, so let's move on to another study guide question. What does positive feedback loops teach us about collective learning? In other words, is collective learning a positive feedback loop? Yeah, it sure is. Can you create, if you want to improve something in your life, in your corporation, can you create positive feedback loops in your life? Yeah, you can. See, one of the things that we often do in like a World Civ class is we learn a bunch of stuff and we go, oh, that's interesting, oh, that's cool, oh, that helps me understand some bit, but we don't apply it to our lives. Let's apply this to our lives, okay? Let's say you're at the head of a corporation, right? Many of you will be someday, okay? Or within a corporation, right? How could you actually apply this concept of positive feedback loops and its effect on collective learning, its effect on innovation, its effect on progress? How could you actually magnify that within a corporation? What do you think? Okay, let's go to DJ and then Kaylee.
Okay, so you just let people share their ideas, because that's what collective learning is all about, people sharing ideas. And when people are allowed to share their ideas, collective learning increases and starts that positive feedback loop.
Yep, yeah, fantastic. So let's get even more specific. How could you actually do that? Kaylee.
Well, really quick, I guess another general example is like we saw with the East, how for most of the East, the reason why the collective learning didn't, I guess, catch on to modern age is because of status quo or social expectation, or even like there's other reasons obviously, but a lot of it was, especially from the Islamic Empire, that it just wasn't, normal, or they didn't want it to be the normal thing anymore. And so I think with, especially businesses can grow very stagnant and very just static in their growth. They can just become kind of like, oh, this is always how we've done it. And so I think if you allow, I guess this is still general, but I guess just specifically when you have your own business or you're part of your own business group, if you kind of allow people to kind of change and grow, allow the group rules and standards to change in a positive way, of course, I think it would really help build those positive feedback. Yeah,
fantastic. Fantastic. Let me give you an example of this from an organization called PARC, P-A-R-C, which was a division of Xerox back in the 70s. You see, Xerox, which is the company that makes Xerox machines, oftentimes, they're copying machines, you know what I mean? Their whole business, is sort of paper, or was sort of paper dependent, right? Like the need to make copies of other pieces of paper. And way back in the 70s, they saw the computer revolution beginning to take off. And they started to recognize, or at least a few people at the corporation started to recognize, hey, we need to get out ahead of this. We want to be leaders in innovation, not just dependent on paper. So they went out, made a big investment, and hired, paid good money, and hired some of the best computer science minds in the country. Most of which were fairly young and fresh out of college. And they brought them together and put them in a separate building in Palo Alto, California, and said, invent, go to work, create. And this group of people ended up creating some incredible inventions that we use today and or improved upon them. So one of them you guys are using right now, mouse, the point and click. They combine the concept of pointer and using a mouse with icons on the computer. So more often than not, you're not punching in a command, right, on your computer. You're pointing and clicking visually. They developed that. In fact, Steve Jobs went into PARC, saw what they were doing, and said, we got to do the same thing, and created the Mac from it, because Xerox couldn't catch the vision of how impactful it could be, right? They couldn't catch that vision, and they were trying to apply it just to copying machines, right? He caught the big picture impact of that and put it in the first Mac computer, okay? The Macintosh, you know what I mean? So they developed that. They developed email systems as we know them today, and they developed web pages as we know them today, developed the initial systems for those. They had, now other people had already been developing a lot of that technology, including the point and click, but they improved upon it and applied it in different ways. So it's not so much that they just created the whole idea from scratch, but they made significant advancements. The sad thing was the people at Xerox didn't know couldn't catch the vision of how to really take advantage of these improvements and these inventions, and didn't really take off with any of them. And other companies that really took off with those inventions. It's kind of fascinating. So here's how they did it though, or one of the ways. So not only did they bring great minds together, and if you're a leader of a corporation, that's going to be useful. It's going to be helpful, you know, bring in some really quality people, right? But here's what they did, which made it particularly fascinating. They had one major rule at PARC. They said every Friday, everyone here will get together and basically present what they've been working on over the past week in front of everyone else. And you'll receive feedback, you'll receive critiques, and you'll have the opportunity to kind of like clash ideas together. People will say, oh, I'm working on this, and you're working on that. I can see how these could connect, and they could make connections between what they were doing. It became this way for them to take all this learning that they were doing, all this inventing, all this creating, and collect it together and get to know what each other is doing. And they would do that every week. You have to stand up in front of everyone, justify what you're doing, so put some pressure on you to really perform, right? And then get feedback, clash of ideas, criticism, and all of that. And it really pushed everyone there forward by just having that feedback loop, right? That's what it was. It created a positive feedback loop. In fact, one of the best ways to improve anything is to get feedback, right? And the more immediate the feedback, the quicker the feedback can come, the quicker the improvement can happen. And if you have a system for improvement and feedback and improvement and feedback and improvement and feedback, you can advance forward at a rapid pace. And so this concept of collective learning, this concept of positive feedback loops that we're applying to this, you know, macro scale, global scale, world zone scale, right, throughout this class, can be applied to your jobs. They could be applied to your classes. They could be applied to your families. These principles apply all the way through.